Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the mechanics of discovery. We're going to demystify exactly how scientists uncover the hidden truths of our universe. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just someone who loves knowing how we know what we know, we are breaking down the complete practical guide to the scientific method. So picture this. You see a plant sitting on a windowsill, and it's leaning toward the sun. Why exactly does it do that? It's kind of a simple everyday observation, right? But it's this exact spark of curiosity that kicks off the entire journey of discovery. Literally every monumental scientific breakthrough started with someone just pausing for a second to ask, why? In this explainer, we'll follow the complete life cycle of a discovery. We're covering the scientific method process, hypotheses and variable types, recording and measuring data, deciphering p-values, visualizing the final results, and finally discussing and sharing those findings. All right, let's jump right into part one, the scientific method process, the life cycle of a discovery. The absolute foundation of all research relies on this ongoing loop. You observe the natural world, you form a testable hypothesis, design a controlled experiment, analyze your data for patterns, and draw a conclusion. But here's the real kicker I want you to remember. The scientific method is an ongoing loop. Even if your data totally contradicts your prediction, and trust me, that happens all the time, that is still great science. You just form a new hypothesis and keep the loop going. Moving right along to part two, hypotheses and variable types, setting up the test. So, to set up a truly rigorous test, science actually starts by assuming your grand idea has absolutely zero effect. We call this the null hypothesis. It's the baseline assumption that any result you see is just, well, random luck. As a researcher, your primary job is actually to try and completely disprove this baseline. You can see the stark logical contrast here. You've got your null hypothesis, no relationship exists, on one side, and your alternative hypothesis on the other. That alternative is saying the independent variable directly influences the dependent variable. Rejecting that null makes your alternative hypothesis, your actual educated guess, the most plausible explanation for what's happening. They're total logical opposites. Now, to actually test that alternative hypothesis, you need to manipulate exactly one element in your experiment. We call this the independent variable. Let's think back to our plant example from earlier. The independent variable is the direction of the light. You're actively controlling and changing this single specific factor to see what happens. This really captures the ultimate cause and effect relationship you're trying to pin down. The independent variable is the cause, the light you change. The dependent variable is the effect, the exact data you measure, like how many millimeters the plant actually bends. And remember, absolutely everything else must be kept exactly the same. But hey, you absolutely must watch out for the villains of our scientific journey. I'm talking about confounding variables. These are hidden factors, things like room temperature, soil acidity, or water levels that have to be perfectly controlled. If you leave them unchecked, they can totally skew your outcomes and trick you into a false conclusion, making you think your independent variable caused an effect when actually it was just a change in the room's temperature. Okay, let's look at part three, recording and measuring data, gathering the evidence. When we start gathering evidence, we kick things off with qualitative observations. You want to safely engage 4 of your human senses to record exactly what's happening in real time. What do you see? Are there color changes or fizzing? What do you smell? And please, remember to use the wafting techniques. You don't inhale dangerous chemicals directly. What do you feel? Like temperature changes? What do you hear? Popping? Whistling? These descriptive nodes are absolutely vital context. But while your senses provide great narrative context, quantitative measurements are what give you the hard, objective numbers needed for real analysis. We're talking exact figures using precise SI units, millimeters, grams, degrees Celsius. You really need both the qualitative descriptions and the quantitative exact numbers to tell the full, accurate story. Which brings us to part 4, p-values and data analysis, deciphering the math. So, the strict hurdle your data must clear revolves around this sort of magical decimal, 0.05. This is the standard alpha level in statistics. Setting your threshold here means you'll only accept a 5% chance that your results were just a random accident. It's the strict mathematical hurdle your data has to clear to prove that your independent variable actually did something. This gives you a literal rule book for your decision-making. When you run your statistical tests, it spits out a p-value. Look at the table. If your calculated p-value falls at or below your 0.05 threshold, the evidence is strong, and you get to confidently reject that null hypothesis.
But if it's above 0.05, you fail to reject it, meaning your results just aren't mathematically strong enough.
But be incredibly careful here. As this comparison shows, just because a result is mathematically or statistically significant doesn't automatically mean the discovery is practically useful in daily life. For example, you might mathematically prove a new diet pill makes people lose half a pound over an entire year. Sure, that might be statistically significant, but practically, it's pretty much useless. Always, always consider the real-world effect size. All right, part 5. Visualizing the final results, showing the truth. I love this quote. Doing research is like hunting for pearls in oysters. Only show the pearls. There's a massive difference between exploring your data by yourself and explaining it to an audience. When you're looking for patterns, you're going to make hundreds of messy charts. But when you're publishing, you have to strip away the clutter. You only present the polished insights, the pearls. Nobody wants you to dump empty oyster shells on them. To make sure your figures maintain high data integrity, you have got to avoid these specific visual tropes. Things like the truncated y-axis, which exaggerates minor differences, or rainbow spaghetti, way too many colors and overlapping lines. Exploded 3D pies literally physically distort the actual data areas, and dual-axis deception can imply completely false correlations. By avoiding these, you ensure your charts have a perfect lie factor of 1, meaning the visual effect exactly matches the mathematical data. No tricks. Finally, part 6, discussing and sharing findings, the final paper. All your incredibly hard work fits perfectly into this exact, globally recognized structure of a published research paper. From your abstracted methodology all the way down to your findings, it all specifically culminates in the discussion section. This is where you actually get to interpret the entire journey for the reader. A truly great discussion section doesn't just dryly repeat the numbers from your results. It analyzes the why. It summarizes key findings, sure, but it also places them right in the context of past literature. It discusses unexpected results, and crucially, it candidly admits the study's limitations. Then, it passes the baton to future researchers by suggesting follow-up research and restating the big implications. So, what will you observe next? You now have the complete, practical toolkit to navigate the life cycle of a discovery, from that very first curious observation, through tight variable control, rigorous p-value analysis, and crystal clear data visualization. So step out into the world, look around, and ask yourself, what hidden truth will you test today? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.